So I'm going to summarize the important bits about syllabi. Syllabus is singular and syllabi is plural. One syllabus, two syllabi. It's Latin. Sounds fancy, right? And this fits in here, as you know. We've looked at the learning outcomes, which is the key planning instrument. From that, we extract the assessment. We should assess the outcomes. And then in the syllabus, which is what you do in the course of a series of 10 to 12 weeks or 15 in some countries, uh, the syllabus is how you fit things into those weeks, okay? So the main problem in the syllabus is the order in which you do them, and that's what we're talking about today. That's called sequencing. And the next step on is for next week. The curriculum is over a year or 2 years in the case of a master, or 3 or 4 in the case of BA programs, okay? So today we're looking at the problem of ordering or sequencing on the level of something that happens over a series of weeks, let's say, okay? And the main thing you have to know was discovered or formulated by this guy, Lev Vygotsky, right back in the 1930s. He's the great theorist of education, like a Russian theorist. And what he calls, or is translated into English as the zone of proximal development, simply means that people are going to learn when they are confronting something that they don't know already, obviously, because they're going to learn. And if they know it already, it's boring and they switch off and look out the window and things like that. And stuff that's not so new that they can't understand it entirely. So in this zone between the already known and the thing to be learned, there has to be an area of knowledge and skills and attitudes that is possible to engage with, but is not already known. And that's very hard to find, actually. When your teaching goes bad, it's either because the students are bored, we're not challenging them at all, or they just don't understand anything that's going on. Now, this has been updated here in the diagram, which I hope you can see. Can you see the diagram?
Yeah.
Assume so. Okay. You got in the middle. I can learn it on my own, so I don't need a teacher. I don't have to come to class. Why should I bother? And then beyond my reach, no way I can get there. But in between, you can learn with the help of a teacher or with the help of technologies. And this is the new thing. We just assumed everybody should be in school to learn in that zone. These days, we can do a lot with technologies. But of course, for the lower levels at least, there are important reasons other than just acquiring new knowledge and skills in that zone. It's also an area of socialization, of becoming a citizen and things like that. Okay. Any questions about this? This is really important. It's the one thing you should take away from this whole subject, the zone of proximal development. Right. Now, when Kelly in our textbook deals with sequencing, she makes a distinction between tasks and projects, okay? And tasks are things like what we do each week in our groups, all right? We give you a problem to solve or put this in order or extract this knowledge, and that's a short-term task. And the teacher tells you what to do and gives you the materials, and you go ahead and do it. Do some homework, that's a task. And the learner has relatively little autonomy in the sense that they are not really able to change the nature of it or decide exactly what to do. And it's more interesting at higher levels to deal with projects which are more extensive. In our translation classes, we get the groups to translate, to sell an Australian product to China. and they can select the product, and they can select the website, and they can do the project, the terminology, and then they have to translate some pieces, and then they have to know how to present it. And there are many, many, many tasks together, and the students can organize it and have to organize themselves. And this is where they have far more autonomy. That means independence, agency, capacity to decide. And they're learning many more transversal skills, we hope, like teamwork, organization, timeliness, etc. Now, there are some problems in sequencing, and I'm going to go through them very quickly, okay? Do you do first theory or practice? Do you work deductively or inductively? I'll revise those terms in a minute. What kind of text should we work on? And how much autonomy? Okay, so Kelly says at the later stages, students can decide everything, but what happens in the earlier stages? What's the first lesson on? In language learning, it's always, if you learn a foreign language, or you're going to, it's the good one is what's your name? And people go around the class asking each other and telling their names. And that way everybody gets to know each other. But you're starting off there with practice. You know, I want to know this, and I'm going to find out how to do it because it's in a situation. What you do in translation is a bit difficult. You could start from what seems to be a simple text, or you could try to emulate that involvement. I want to translate this. So I would do the what's your name one, but using a translator, for example. I'm interested in this one here, that Basil Hatim, who wrote a textbook for training English Arabic translators, the first thing he puts up there is a contract. And people think, what, like a legal contract or a rental contract or something like that. And people think, well, that's specialized translation. That's really difficult because people have to look up the terminology of things. But in fact, because Hatim was teaching text types and how to adjust for text types, contracts are the very simplest text type. So your first lesson can once again go back to your learning outcomes and looking at them and thinking seriously, well, in this learning outcome, what is simple and easy at the beginning of Vygotsky's progression, and what is more challenging? Theory before practice, spoken before written, concocted authentic. Here we go. Some cultures teach music like this. You have to learn the theory. You would learn these notes and how to read them, and then you play the instrument. I know this happens in Spain. Has in China, has anybody learned to play music in China?
Yeah.
How does it work?
So I played the piano when I was a kid. So we first learned how to read the music, the notes. Then we play the music. So it's very top down.
Top down, yeah.
No.
Yeah. And it is in Spain too. And and for me, I'd learned, yeah, piano as a kid for sure. No, I wanted to play. So I just went and figured out the music. And then I had to learn to read the music. What's better? Start with the practice or start with the theory?
I guess it works both ways.
Yeah.
But I would prefer to play the piano first. Then
Yeah.
based on the music, learn the notes,
Yeah.
and other things only music.
What we're calling a deductive approach, deductive, says here are the principles. This is how music works. This is how you can read it. Learn all these principles. Now apply them. Okay, so deductive would go from theory to practice, whereas inductive goes the other way. Bang on the piano, discover the difference between the notes, try to figure out a little tune, and then we'll tell you how music works. Okay, and most learning combines the two, but different cultures, different education cultures are very different here. My whole learning experience as a kid in primary school was highly inductive. We didn't get many principles, and we didn't learn much grammar, for example, yeah, which I much regret. I would have preferred something more deductive. But the advantages of induction are fundamentally motivation. That students are doing things, they're not just passive, they're engaged, and they can select tasks that they really want to do. Like I really wanted to play a tune on the piano, and so I was going to figure it out. And once I figured it out, I had learned it much, much more deeply than I would have done just learning in the deductive way. The problem in translation, I suggest, is that we really have no firm theory, like there is no music for translation. We have lots of disparate skills that don't really fit together very well. So my personal preferences are obvious. I prefer to teach inductively. However, look what I'm doing. I'm telling you the theory right now, and then we're going to apply it. In translation, in my personal experience, I can prepare a class, I can select the text, I can say, I've got this text because I think there are these three really good problems, and we're going to discuss and we're going to bring out those problems, and that's my learning outcome. Walk into class, all the theory is great, and what happens? The students pick up other problems in the text that are far more interesting than the ones I wanted to work on. And so we go off and discuss them because the students want to discuss them. My learning outcome doesn't really get done, but it can be a good class nevertheless. So beware what we are teaching you here, that you go from your learning outcome to your assessment, your activities and things. Often what happens is much more interesting, and I personally like to be open to them. Uh, Now, do you work on authentic texts or concocted? Concocted means manipulated, means, for example, if I want to give a lesson on the polite or the formal or informal second person, for example, which is a problem in translating, uh, I can select a text that has that problem, or I can get a text and put it in. I can put things, I can plant problems in the text to work on. Okay, so to provoke the experience, the confrontation with the thing that I want to teach. Uh, there are many preferences there. I've in the English-speaking world, a lot of people firmly believe you should always use authentic texts because we're training people for the real world, and we got to bring that real world into the classroom. I think that's true at the higher levels, the more the project level. At the lower levels, my personal preference there is for inauthentic text, for manipulated text, so as to focus on, for example, all these things which I could put into learning outcomes, and I would then manipulate text so as to focus on those things in a class. Any preferences there, you?
Mm. Yeah, I think that both manipulate and authentic can be used at different stages
Yeah,
of training.
yeah. And I would say consider manipulation at the task level and
Mm,
be authentic at the project level.
yes.
Um, Now, a big issue which really doesn't concern syllabi as much as the whole curriculum and where we train translators. Some countries only train translators and interpreters at master level. Other countries translate them at bachelor level, at the lower level. And China, you do both,
Yeah.
uh, which is interesting. If is there really that much knowledge in translation that you need so many years to learn about it? I personally don't think there is a lot of knowledge. There's just a lot of practice.
Mm,
However, this is a very fundamental question. Do you learn the languages first and then learn to translate? And it sounds like a no-brainer. It seems obvious. First, you learn the two languages, and then you learn how to translate. But my concern is that all language learning involves people thinking, adult language learning, sorry, involves people thinking in terms of translation. So I really think we should be discovering things about translation as we learn a language, but that's an argument we can have with the language educationalists. The final problem I want to deal with here is text difficulty, just to mention that it is very difficult to determine what a difficult text is. Okay. Uh, it's assumed in many syllabi that you go from the general text to the specific. That's why I mentioned Basil Hatim and that Arabic coursework. That's wrong, I think. The more specialized and formulated the text, the easier it is to translate. There's nothing more difficult than a general text that mixes many genres and fields of knowledge. But that's a debate that can be had. My preference is to start with specialized. Okay. Um, a text can be difficult for one language pair and not for the other. So you've got to really try it out. Try to translate it yourself before the class and see what difficulties are there. I think at the lower levels, lower level, not in the sense of losing nobility, but the simpler levels that are more task-based, it's still legitimate to work on isolated sentences. I do that when I teach solution types, for example. They are just very short sentences. The tendency has long been, since the 19th century, to start from phrase and sentence level and work up to longer texts. And I think that is correct. I have no reason to question that. Obviously, the longer the text, the more issues involved, the more it is like a project. And texts help with motivation if they are good and interesting texts that people want to know about. All right. Which is a great reason, I think, for letting students choose the texts, like we let you choose the tutorials materially. Yeah. Uh, hoping that it corresponds to those that are going to motivate you. Now, the bottom line, as I've put at the bottom, in theory, sequencing should go back to your learning outcomes or objectives, as I put it here. That should be your guideline. However, the outcomes when you write them are just a list of things. There is not, usually there's nothing evident in the outcomes that tells you this is the way you're going to structure the course or the subject. The sequencing is a very hard task, and when it goes wrong, you know about it because you're not putting students in the zone of proximal development. And that's it for my presentation.